The year is 1794. The newly formed United States of America faces its first major challenge, the Whiskey Rebellion. This uprising, centered in western Pennsylvania, was a test of the young nation's strength and the authority of its federal government. The rebellion was sparked by a tax levied on whiskey in 1791. This tax, seen as an attempt by the Eastern elite to exploit the Western farmers, ignited a fire of resentment that quickly spread throughout the region. The farmers, already struggling with economic hardships, saw the tax as a direct attack on their livelihood and their way of life. The whiskey tax, however, was more than just a means to raise revenue. It was a symbol of the government's power to tax and assert its authority over the newly formed nation. The newly established federal government, under the leadership of President George Washington, desperately needed funds to repay debts incurred during the Revolutionary War. The war had left the nation in financial turmoil, and finding a steady source of income was crucial for the country's stability. Whiskey, a readily available commodity, became a prime target for taxation. It was produced in large quantities and was widely consumed, making it an ideal candidate for generating revenue. For the farmers in western Pennsylvania, whiskey was more than just a drink. It was a form of currency. They relied on it not only for personal consumption, but also as a medium of exchange in a cash-poor economy. They distilled their surplus grain into whiskey, which was easier to transport and trade than the bulky grain itself. This process allowed them to convert their crops into a more manageable and profitable product. The tax, levied on each gallon produced, cut directly into their already meager profits, making their lives even more difficult. Many farmers viewed this tax as an unfair burden imposed by a distant government that did not understand their struggles. The resentment grew, and the farmers' frustration with the federal government intensified, setting the stage for a significant conflict that would test the young nation's resolve and unity. Angered by the tax, the farmers of western Pennsylvania rose in defiance. They were not just upset, they were furious, feeling the weight of injustice bearing down on them. They viewed the tax as unfair and discriminatory, a blatant attempt to exploit their hard work. They argued that it disproportionately affected them, the small producers, while larger distilleries in the East were less impacted. The tax seemed designed to crush the small, independent spirit of the Western farmers. The farmers organized protests, refused to pay the tax, and even resorted to violence and intimidation against tax collectors. Their actions were driven by desperation and a sense of betrayal. The rebellion was fueled by a sense of isolation and resentment towards the federal government, which the farmers perceived as distant and unsympathetic to their plight. They felt abandoned by those who were supposed to represent them. They felt ignored and marginalized, their voices lost in the halls of power concentrated in the East. The divide between the rural West and the urban East seemed insurmountable. They saw the whiskey tax as a symbol of this oppression, a tangible manifestation of their grievances. It was more than just a tax. It was a symbol of their struggle and resistance against an uncaring government. The situation escalated rapidly, forcing President Washington to take decisive action. The unrest was growing and the stakes were high. He issued a formal proclamation urging the rebels to disperse and obey the law. This was a critical moment, as Washington hoped to restore order without further conflict. However, his words went unheeded. The defiance among the rebels was palpable, and they continued to resist. The rebellion reached its peak in July 1794 when a group of rebels attacked the home of John Neville, a tax inspector. This violent confrontation was a clear sign of the escalating tensions. The attack on Neville's home, known as the Battle of Bower Hill, marked a significant turning point in the rebellion. The violence and destruction were unprecedented. The federal government could no longer ignore the challenge to its authority. The rebellion was now a direct threat to the stability of the young nation. President Washington, determined to enforce federal law and quell the rebellion, assembled a formidable militia force of nearly 13,000 men. With resolve and determination, he marched towards western Pennsylvania, ready to restore order and uphold the rule of law.